Thanks, Simon. I hope everybody can hear me, and I'm honored to be part of the summer school. I am in fact at an undisclosed location, but it's not a Russian airport. I do want to seek asylum from my fellow lawyers, though, and so I hang out with Simon. I hang out with communities that are not necessarily all lawyers, because it is my absolute belief that people in other disciplines, particularly in disciplines like information retrieval, that have a lot to share with the lawyer community, that the lawyer community is really sort of kindergartners or elementary school students compared at that level compared with the graduate level that other people are at in looking at information retrieval type topics. And so what I want to do, I'm actually in the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts, which is, I think I confused Simon once by saying I was in Berkshire and he thought I was west of London, but I'm really west of London. Hanging out for a month teleworking, or that's what I'm telling my boss I'm doing, and having a good time. But it does give me time away from the main office to think about subjects like this. The last time I presented at the summer school at Simon's invite, it was, I believe, last September, and what I am doing is reprising the slides that I did from last September. The law moves at a glacial pace, and while there were very big developments in the law in terms of advanced search in the year 2012, there isn't a whole lot of movement in the world of visual analytics for courts looking at or discussing evidence in new and exciting ways. And so the law hasn't really changed very much from September 2012 to July 2013, but something did happen in 2012, which was a recognition on the part of, at least in the US, that topics like predictive coding, that is machine learning or technology-assisted review, were important and were something different. And while there's not that many judges who have written on the subject, and not that many lawyers who have litigated cases using these advanced search techniques, they are happening. It is a movement that is definitely happening at conferences all over the United States and in other places. And it seems to be that the next wave is visual analytics. Because the power of these new methods that I'll get into just naturally mean that lawyers are thinking about data in new and different ways. And so what I want to do is challenge everyone that's in the room here with Simon, that you all could probably think of 100 things that I can't think of based on your knowledge of software and your knowledge of what's happening in the space, that would be of benefit to lawyers both in the US and in the UK and elsewhere. And so I hope that just in the few minutes we have together, that it's not that I'm spoon feeding some answers like this is a solved problem. Far from it. We are at the very beginning of a conversation about visual analytics in law, which might take 50 years to get right. But you all could be part of that conversation, whether it's through academic theses or going out to corporate institutions and insisting that that people think of big data sets in new ways and that they ask different types of questions. Let me pause here and make sure that, Simon, I'm being heard and that this is okay?
Yeah, we can hear everything.
Okay, good. All right, let's go to the slides. Let's go to the next slide, Nisha or whoever, Chris. And so what I want to do is I want to quickly talk through the as-is model of e-discovery and e-disclosure, and then I move in the end to my pretty pictures of slides. I'm a bit of an outlier in the summer school, just as Simon is a bit of an outlier in the e-discovery space, but I must say, I would be remiss in saying that Simon's work, recent work with Larry Chapin and generally work with others, has been noted prominently in blogs in the US and in the DESI conference that we both were at in Rome. And many lawyers are intrigued by the idea of narrative and sense-making as a way of having insight into e-discovery. So anyway, but I digress. In the same way that Simon's work is finding its way into the conversation, I'd like to think that what I'm talking about, which some of you would think is old hat in terms of keyword searching and beyond, but I'd like to think that I'm pushing the envelope always in challenging the legal profession and inviting you all in to have a conversation. So we'll talk about the as-is model, and then we'll talk about my experience in this one case in tobacco as a set piece to move beyond Boolean and to think about supervised learning and what I call the promise of visual analytics. What is e-discovery and e-disclosure? They're basically the same thing. So when I say e-discovery, it's electronic discovery. It's the discovery of electronic evidence before you go to trial. And in the UK, it's called electronic disclosure under Part 31 of your rules. We have a Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. In both systems in the US and UK, lawyers are responsible for handing over the evidence on request. If you want to know what the opposing party's documents are, including electronic documents, you make a formal request for it. And then the other side is supposed to professionally look for as many documents as they can find that are relevant to the request and to hand them back to you, except if they're privileged. So that exchange of information is what the discovery process, civil discovery or civil disclosure in the UK, and e-discovery is simply electronically stored information that is relevant to a discovery request. All right, so we'll go on to the next slide. So why do I have a picture of Prague? Now I will let Simon, since I can't see the room here, ask for a show of hands of who's been to Prague, and Simon can tell me how many hands have gone up.
15.
And out of
how many?
A lot, right? So I suggest that everyone who has not been to Prague, put it on your bucket list of places to go. I think it's one of the most beautiful cities in Europe. This is a view of the Charles Bridge, and if you can see it, and the castle beyond it. As I think many of you know, Franz Kafka was born in Prague, and Franz Kafka is the patron saint of US government bureaucracy, especially nowadays, for lots of reasons that I don't think I need to explain. But since we're a completely dysfunctional country when it comes to our congressional process. And mysterious in lots of ways. Now, I put this slide up because I consider it to be the central metaphor for lawyers confronting e-discovery search issues in the 21st century. So it's not just that I love Prague, but I really see it as a metaphor. The metaphor of the castle is think of castles as places that have hundreds of rooms in them. Some of the rooms are large, some of the rooms are very small, some are, you only have secret knowledge of where they are through secret passageways. You can think of those as the encrypted rooms. The rooms that are large and small, think of them all as kind of filled with siloed information on legacy platforms that don't really speak to each other very well. And we don't know what is going on in some rooms in the basement or the attic of the castle or the tower. Just like in any kind of modern institution, I dare say that's true of universities like Middlesex too, that the people in one part of the university don't know really what the research is being done in others. But I've worked for 13 years at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, and I couldn't tell you what the people across the hall are doing. Not that we're all like the NSA, it's not that we're doing super secret stuff, but the people across the hall, I think they have something to do with web-based access, but I couldn't tell you, let alone the rest of the building. So we're all siloed, and when it comes to searching for electronic evidence, this makes it a very, very difficult problem generally. To search across an enterprise in a federated way, to have a visual picture of what is the data set that might be relevant to a particular lawsuit. And so when thinking about the visual space, one needs to sort of keep this metaphor in mind that we can get a look-see at some parts of a collection, but it's very hard to get a federated look, and products and services that do that will certainly be a benefit. All right, next slide. So just running through this, the haystack is very, very large when it comes to electronic information. And the challenge in the next slide is to find relevant needles through a maze. You can go to the next slide, it's through a maze. But the task at hand for us as lawyers is different than what everybody in the room here today does when they search through Google or your favorite search engine to find a restaurant in London or a restaurant wherever you are. If you do a search, the information task is very different for me than it is for the normal Google task. And we need to keep that in mind, that my task is to find all the needles, any and all documents related to a particular topic, not just the first few needles that are at the top of the pile. So when Google returns results, you type in restaurant and Indian, if you want Indian food, and London, you will get 100,000 hits, but nobody goes to look at all those 100,000 hits. You only look at the first few pages. And not only that, Google has nicely ranked the first listings for you in the order of popularity of what has been searched before, which is very different than doing searches in a corporate data set, which are obviously not ranked by popularity. They're just the data set. If you have 1 million emails that you're searching against, they're not ranked by popularity, not often. Anyway, so the task is different, and there's one more very curious thing that I bet not every person knows. It's a pretty smart crowd that Simon has there, and so I'm sure you all know this. Many of you know this, but I'm not sure everybody knows this, and I didn't know it until about 2 or 3 years ago, which is that if 2 people in this room do the exact same query on Google of a restaurant, Indian, London, whatever, you're going to get different results based on what you have searched on before from that same machine, from that same IP address. And I'm not sure that's well known in the greater world, but it is very problematic. You have these kind of recommender systems that are out there that are returning results, but the question for lawyers is how to have a defensible process when you do searches. And the difference between one person doing a search on one machine and another with the same search terms leading to a different ranked order in results is an awkward thing to explain to a court or to the other side if you've missed something. In terms of the visual side to it, I'm sure you all understand it is eye-opening to lawyers to have collections of data that you pull a visual search from, and you have a whole set of links and clusters of documents visually linked up together, and you put in a new data set, you supplement the data set by another accession, and lo and behold, the galaxies and the links all change. That is deeply discomforting to lawyers who have to get used to the fact that there's a dynamic element to everything we do in terms of big data. It's not a static universe. The data keeps changing. On an email system, there's always the next day's email. And if you're under a legal obligation to preserve it and to search it, you're going to come back with potentially different visuals. If you're doing a visual look into the data set, and you'll come back with a different search results in regardless of what you do. So that is of interest. All right, next slide. King Kong, and if you press one more button, I don't know whether it's the next slide. We'll see if it comes up. Yeah, email, still the 800-pound gorilla. In my world, although you can challenge me on this, I know that my daughter, who is now 18, says that email is for old people, Daddy. She can only be reached by text, does not respond to any email from her parents. In the federal government, in my world, although that age cohort is coming and they'll expect text messaging and they'll expect Web 2.0 social media collaborations more so than what we do, it is still the case that email is the most candid medium of communication in the government, that people, remarkable what is said on email that a government lawyer or a government official will not say in other medium. I suppose General Petraeus comes to mind with the CIA, but there are many other examples, and all of us are guilty of being much, much more candid with respect to our true views on colleagues and on what opinions they have, and in the government space, what policy options exist on email than we would ever do in a formal document. And that remains the case in 2013, where there are billions of emails exchanged, sent and received from 300 federal departments and agencies in the US. So it is still the 800-pound gorilla. Now, there are lots of other media that I'm aware of, and we don't want to forget them when we're thinking about the visual analytics space in terms of conversations that use other forms of communication. In the future, tweets on Twitter and any number of other forms of two-way conversations that are captured as part of agency websites will be grist for visual analytics, but email is still the number one thing. So we'll go on to the next slide. And just as a point of reference, this is the last dinosaur of lawyers doing keyword searches, Boolean searches, with a 350 billion page universe, 3 petabytes, which is not, which is a very large e-discovery task, going through that amount of pages to look for relevant documents. This was part of the financial crisis meltdown in 2008 and an investigation to it, where 5 million documents were reviewed after a set of Boolean strings, 40 million pages using 70 attorneys. They did not use what I'm advocating as best practices, and they certainly didn't use any visual aids in the search here. It was keyword searching. I think that's a dinosaur. I think that's a legacy of the 20th century to not use predictive coding, not use new methods. So there we are. Now, I only have 800 more slides. No, I'm kidding. But but I'm conscious that the time is, what it is. And so I'm going to, with everybody's indulgence, impose on Nisha and Krista to go with me. I'll say next slide a lot, And we'll just go through it very fast till we get to the fun stuff at the end. There's some heavy going in the middle, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on vector space analytics, but let's keep going, and I'm well aware that there are a lot of slides here, but all right, we'll keep going. Okay, so I want to go through this very fast. There's a Philip Morris case that I've been involved with for the last decade, and it was 32 million White House emails involved in the case. You see the query terms here. I was asked to go look against the Clinton White House email collection of what is 20 million presidential emails, and I came up with a bunch of keywords for the Justice Department to search against. But in doing so, I dreamed up round one. I was asked to look at other terms at the suggestion of the tobacco lawyers like PMI, Philip Morris Institute, TI Tobacco Institute. Go on to the next slide. The issue, though, is that when you look for relevant emails on tobacco and you want to search for the Marlboro Man and you want to search for what Al Gore did because he was responsible for the lawsuit, the racketeering lawsuit against Big Tobacco that began in 1994. What you get is a lot of false positives, and particularly, why do I have Julie Andrews here? Well, I'll tell you. So what I get is let me put up the next slide, see if it has the Boolean string. So Marlboro versus Upper Marlboro, Maryland. Clearly, lots of emails have Marlboro in it, but have nothing to do with it. Philip Morris Institute versus there were a tremendous number of emails involving Monica Lewinsky in the Presidential Management Intern Program in the Clinton White House. The Master Settlement Agreement versus other terms, and Tobacco Institute. For some reason, there were thousands of emails in the collection with referencing Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music because of do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, and then T. And that told me something. It told me that I'm spending a lot of time with keywords producing false positives. The next slide. And we really shouldn't be in the keyword business. You can construct Booleans, and you can try to do this with iterative methods to use and not to get out of the false positive business. But you have to start constructing very, very long Booleans. And nobody does this perfectly. And there are lots of limitations. Keyword searching is very powerful. But as I realized a decade ago, and as lawyers have come to realize, and a whole set of case law, it has serious limitations to it. Next slide. And so, yeah, keep clicking through that slide. Keep going. There. So, I mean, yeah, in terms of 20 million emails, it took 6 months to go through 200. You go back to the previous slide. Yeah, so 200,000 documents with hits based on the keywords, and then having 6 months, 25 people going through those documents one by one, 100,000 relevant documents, 20,000 put on a privilege log. That doesn't work anymore for the Lehman Brothers example. I could do that in 2003, but in 2013, with 1 billion emails coming from the Obama administration in 2017, it doesn't work. And there's got to be new methods, new ways of thinking about the legal space. The as-is model is broken down. Next slide. If you really, if you really took 50 an hour on 1 billion emails, I'm not suggesting that you do. It would take 54 years to complete the task of going through. So clicking through emails is not possible, even if it's 1%. 200,000 was 1% of 20 million, but 1% of 1 billion is 10 million documents, and 28 weeks, $20 million, that's too much. It's all too much. The paradigm is broken. Next slide. And we can just go through these slides. Courts have recognized the limitations on keyword searching. That's the as-is model. So we can go past Judge Grimm's slides to the next one. Judges are afraid Judge Fasciola said, hey, given the complexity in this area of searching, you know, it is going where angels fear to tread. And this slide, let me go quickly. This on the pros and cons. These slides will be made available to everybody, and I don't want to convert this lecture into a Boolean versus vector space retrieval when we want to get to the good stuff. But there are pros and cons of Boolean. Let's go on to the next slide. What lawyers are moving to is recognizing a vector space model. When they say predictive coding, what it really is grouping documents together, mapping every word in a document as a vector, and grouping like documents together where the combined vector, by looking at the cosines, is close to another document. And if you do this in a large collection, you end up with clusters of documents, and you can see where it's going in terms of a visual application. Next slide. So it's really a term frequency thing, and I won't spend, you go on to the next slide. It's really a term-term similarity in documents. That's the whole clustering exercise, and that's fine. We can go to here and pause on this, which is less confusing. So we have clustering as a technique where we're bringing like documents together. All of the football fantasy pools, which means something different in the US than I think it does in the UK. But I bet you have football fantasy pools in corporate environments. In fact, you can't believe how many emails are devoted to football fantasy pools in the US. It approaches 10%. Anyway, for reasons that I don't understand, but in any event, one can cluster those documents together before you even have a human in the loop. You just use the software to do that, and you've already advanced the ball in terms of being able to look at large collections of what are documents that are thematically related together, either on a black list or a white list, either because the topics are clearly irrelevant to anything, you know, broadcast messages, other types of spam, other types of low value messages that you could clean out of an e-discovery search. But then looking at what you really want to get at, if you want to get at tobacco policy documents clustered together with certain words being used. In addition, the next thing that lawyers have seized on in the last couple of years is to marry up a clustering technique with what is machine learning or supervised learning. And so on the front end, having lawyers seed a set of documents, look at a seed set, either drawn at random or drawn either due to keyword or some other judgmental sampling technique, and coding the documents as relevant or not relevant. So if I gave each of you 100 documents out of 1 billion emails and had told you I want them to be related to the problems the US is having with getting a certain individual out of a Russian airport, if that's the issue that you want to research of White House email, and believe me, I'm sure there's lots of current White House email on that topic, but we won't see that at the archives until 2017. If you would take an email and code it as either relevant or not relevant to Edward Snowden, each of you could do your relevancy coding for a set of documents. There would be a surprising lack of consistency among assessors, which is well known in the information retrieval space. But nevertheless, at the end of that coding exercising, we came to a consensus on what documents are relevant. You then feed it back in iteratively to a mathematical algorithm that does the clustering using latent semantic indexing, using support vector machines, using a lot of cool stuff. And what it ends up as is that the software codes the billion or however many documents you have in a fraction of the time that it took me to use with lawyers to click through emails. So as long as you have confidence in the seed set and the coding decisions and the quality control that you put it on the front end, these new techniques have incredible utility for lawyers, because if you're willing to assume arguendo to stipulate that the techniques are at least as good as manual review, and the work in the Trek Legal Trek and the DESI workshops have lots of papers that have shown that to be the case. It's at least as good as manual review, if not better, in terms of recall and precision. Then the answer is obvious. A tie goes to the machine, because the machine can do coding in 1,000th of the time of individuals. So that's what's new and exciting in the last year in the law. And next slide. It's been recognized in the case law. Judge Peck, in a case called De Silva Moore, which you can find on the web, says, hey, you don't have to be a guinea pig anymore as a lawyer. If your client, your corporation, doesn't think that these newfangled techniques of predictive coding are explainable or defensible, and that they're worried that if you're not doing keywords, you're not going to be able to defend your searches, at least in Judge Peck's court in New York, he says, hey, he recognizes that such methods are defensible. And other judges have taken the lead from him. And there's now something on the order of a dozen decisions which not only champion predictive coding, but also are just out and out semi-contemptuous of parties that have tried to rely on keyword searching. One court went so far as to say that keyword searching is an insipid approach to e-discovery. Okay, next slide. Now let's keep going so that we can and let's go past this protocol slide. So let's get to the world of tomorrow, which is the world that you all are now in. Next slide. So what I have here is really just a whole set of, it's kind of like a hodgepodge or a laundry basket of different types of visual looks at collections. Yeah, Vicki was present at the summer school. I take it, Simon, she's not there in the room.
No, she's not here. She's in Halifax.
Oh, right. Oh, she was remotely in too, right?
Yeah.
So Vicki is a favorite of mine, and I think of Simon's that she's doing really good work in this area. Had the privilege of writing an article you check out in the Canadian called Law and Technology about visual analytics and e-discovery. She has different ways of looking at collections. We'll come back to some of these in a moment, but let's keep going. So in looking at data sets, when I talk about clusters of documents, it can be visually looked at by this kind of three-dimensional presentation. Next. And galaxy views of clusters of like documents where you can focus in on the particular galaxy that you are interested in and see what's in it and make decisions about whether you've done a reasonable job of thematically capturing a set of relevant or irrelevant documents. I think this is a very good technique. It doesn't solve all of my e-discovery problems. One still has to do a rigorous look using the algorithms that I was talking about. But I think it's a very good approach for what's known as early case assessment, to take a look at what you've got in terms of big data and see what you've actually got in the collection of a client's data set. There are colleagues of mine who swear by the techniques that I'm describing as ways to settle cases early, because they find documents early and they can basically tell their client they really do need to settle. Next slide. And another way of visualizing a space is to look at changes in the way people are talking over time, so that particular topics, one can graph how they were discussed in a particular month. So you take email and you basically plot it by clusters of conversations, and then in a river view, what pops out is that you've got a flow of conversations over time, and looking at spikes in this may well be very, very interesting if you want to take a deposition of someone, have them under oath in testimony, and ask them why in a particular month they were doing X or Y or Z. Becomes a very interesting exercise. Next slide. I think there's more, the river view here. Just another representations. And then a bar chart, again, you can do this in any way you want, by author, topic, keywords, whatever. It is very, very interesting to lawyers to see a zero, a null set on a particular month. What if two people in a corporation were talking to each other continuously about a topic that's relevant to a lawsuit, and then they stop talking for a month? Maybe one was on vacation, but maybe, who knows? Well, or the reverse, that a particular topic that's relevant in the litigation spikes. And so the question is why? And looking at that visually helps lawyers to then hone in on looking at, with more focus and intensity, a set of emails from a particular month. Our next slide. And similarly, one can, this is from the Enron collection, you can take any individual and plot against them who they have communicated with in the data set. So one person with one email account is talking to a whole set of actors, and then you can look at the geography of the places that they're talking to. You can do this across any attribute set. Next slide. And then, of course, you have a whole set of links between people, which we've already seen in a little bit with Vicky's slide. And then we'll just go through this. It's essentially the same concept. It's people talking to each other, and, a link analysis. Next slide. And just keep going. We can zoom in on important individuals. Can look at the clustering that goes on, do it to a scalable up to whatever level we can, and we'll keep going. Just other examples in the space, message streams. And we'll keep going. And then from Wikipedia, I couldn't help myself, so I looked at Wikipedia on an example of this, and if you go on to the next slide, you have just links in Wikipedia articles. Next slide. And keep going. And so, one could do this in a data set of any kind with the right software. All right, next. And then you have tree map distributions of kind of the size of conversation, the size of repositories within corporate data sets. This may be mundane to many of you. I know Ben Schneiderman's been doing tree maps in Maryland for a long time, but as applied in the e-discovery world or to email, it's pretty novel to have this kind of views into data sets. Next. And then even more mundane slides. Lawyers and if you're doing courtroom presentations, there's all sorts of visual kind of, charts and graphs that one could do that are beyond what the more sophisticated links and clusters that I've been talking about that are innate in e-discovery. So, obviously visualization works on any number of levels. Next slide. Very mundane here in terms of where documents are in terms of a corporate repository. Next slide. And we've already been talking about spikes in communications, so I don't think I have anything else to say about this. All right, next. And yeah, that's the same thing. All right, we'll go on to the next slide. And again, what I've said is that, one could track this with any level of granularity you want. Next slide. Okay, so, all right, that's the end of my pretty pictures for lawyers. The challenges in the space are what you see. I think Vicki and I have written about this. There are clearly obstacles to the adoption by all lawyers of using visual analytics, but the savviest lawyers are going to find such techniques to be of enormous benefit when they're looking at data sets on their own and when they're analyzing the data sets that they get in discovery. And the tech savvy ones will be successful in ferreting out relevant documents faster and more efficiently than their counterparts. There are issues of defensibility. I'm not sure I would put up a cluster diagram in a court and expect the judge to understand what's going on. But there we have it. All right, next slide. And I said this in September, and Simon knows this. From my point of view, the most interesting academic research in this area that could be done that puts together the lawyer's point of view and thinking about what's possible in the space is to basically ask, are lawyers asking the wrong questions? And what kind of questions can we ask of a data set to exploit the metadata in the data set and to basically exploit the data set, the contents itself? And so asking questions like, what was the first time there was a spike in communications, forces parties to confront the fact that they are being asked this. They need to know the answer themselves. If they hand over a document set, the other side using software is going to find out the answer. So it forces a level of sophistication in conversations between opposing counsel that really wasn't possible before, and you can see other questions that could be asked. Who knew senior most individuals? How did the knowledge of topic X spread? One topic that I find really interesting is there's some people I know at work on looking at emotions across email and tracking, whether there was a spike in terms of angry emails or upset emails by one individual or by a collection of individuals. That would be quite interesting to see if one could track the emotions of a target of an investigation in a way. And so, there's an endless number of questions. What I started talking at the beginning of the hour is that each person in this room could probably do a good job of thinking of 20 more questions to ask. And I'd encourage some thoughts on that and really would be delighted to have a conversation with any of you going forward. If Simon, well, I'll get to that in a moment. So yeah, next slide. So just to round up here, and I know it's late in the day, so you've all indulged me, so thank you. The strategic challenges are getting the legal community to basically see the value of visual analytics, that it's desirable, it's even necessary to figure out, really to get a good look at, to get a good knowledge of the space. Next challenge. Designing an overall process that maximizes responsive documents, no matter what the search tool is. I think my view is that visual analytic techniques are great. The clusters that are going on, any kind of look into the collection, of enormous help and will maximize recall and precision in new ways. Lawyers exploit it. Next slide. having parties understand that doesn't guarantee all responsive documents. I think judges in particular have to understand that if any of these methods were defended in court. Next slide. Being open to new methods, being open to AI techniques generally. I believe that I've had a role in advancing the conversation in the US with lawyers and judges kind of slowly waking up to the limitations on keyword search, but by no means do I think that predictive coding is the end all or be all. And similarly, as I say, we're only at the beginning of an era of visual analytics used to help lawyers, and so we have to be open to new methods. Next slide. I think we're basically at the end, but yeah, if you have the next slide. So my cartoon here, if everybody could read it, which says, I'll be happy to give you innovative thinking. What are the guidelines? That's for all of you to think about how you can innovate in this space and come up with the latest and greatest products that will help lawyers and become rich in the process with your IPO. So don't ask what the guidelines are, be just innovative in the space. So I have a bunch of references. You can go to the next slide, but I won't stop there. You can keep going. Encourage people to take a look at various papers that are in the space. These slides will be available. And my email is there, and I'd really be happy to have a conversation. And what I was going to say, certainly take questions here, but certainly going to say is that I promise, Simon, that I will do better than just reprising my slides from a prior summer school if you invite me to actually show up in person next time. And look forward to an opportunity to work with you and others at the university. So maybe that will come to pass. Anyway, thanks everybody.
Thank you, Jason.